All right, looks like we're ready.
Okay.
Very
Yes,
good.
sir. We are ready.
All right, good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting of the Governance Committee of the LCTCS Board of Supervisors. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I'll ask LCTCS Board Coordinator Sarah Landreneau-Kleinpeter to review a few points, given that we are holding a virtual meeting of the committee and live streaming to YouTube. Sarah?
Yes, sir. As a reminder, the meeting is being live streamed online to whoever is watching, so please be mindful of that during our non-business conversations. Those joining by remote access are asked to keep yourselves on mute during the meeting and use the raise hand feature if available for the comment or question. When recognized, unmute yourself, give it a few seconds before you make your comments, and return to mute to avoid background noise during the remainder of the meeting. If you have trouble with your technology at this point, which I hope you don't at this point, after a year and a half of doing this, you should call me. And if you can view the board items via the links posted on the LCTCS website. We will conduct a roll call vote at the start of the meeting, and each motion, if there is one, will require a roll call vote for approval. Members, please state your name if you make a motion. Motions must be made by sound and not gesture. Public comments can be made during today's meeting via the open conference call line at 877-810-9415, access code 6499147#. That information is in the notice of meeting posted on the LCTCS website, lctcs.edu. Any comments received during the meeting will be read by the board secretary or a designee. All public comments must include an agenda item number, a name, and a brief statement. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per comment.
All right, with that, Mr. Chairman, we'll turn to you for a call to order.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I would like to call this meeting to order. I will preside until Supervisor Toops arrives. Would ask Tim to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Yes, sir.
Mr. Tim is muted, but I will go ahead and, oh, thank you, Mr. Tim.
No, I've got it. Looking at the flag, thank you all for rising. We'll begin. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and
to
to the republic
for which
which
it
stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. That'll drive that Zoom audio crazy when everybody's trying to do it at one time. Ms. Sarah, would you do a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. And
Here.
joining us.
Here.
There he is. Good.
Here.
Fantastic. Mr. Toots, chairman of this committee.
Here.
Mr. Hardy, vice chairman of the committee.
Here.
Ms. Carter, committee member.
Here.
Mr. Murphy will be with us shortly. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Price.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum of the board present.
That is fantastic. And if you will tell me what the first thing to do is, we can
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead. Because
Well, there's a statement that you'll need to read. If you don't have it, though, Mr. Price can read it for you.
I would love to hear Mr. Price's chipper voice this morning while I look for the last email from you.
Yes, sir.
You said there was, I don't have a statement.
Well,
Oh.
I'll take care of it. So
Thank you.
it-
Yes,
um,
Dr. Sullivan, please.
members,
Take
you've
care of that.
received the agenda, and in accordance with Louisiana Revised Statute 4217.1, as presiding officer, you have determined that the matters this agenda are considered critical or time sensitive and should not be delayed. Committee Chair Toops requests a motion to approve the agenda and the consideration of the matters on it, item D.
And so now we will conduct a roll call vote, and this is a motion to approve the agenda and the items on it. And that statement, again, has to do with the new statute for our virtual meetings.
Sir, I was kind of able to join through the phone. I couldn't get in on Zoom. Go ahead.
Fantastic, Mr. Murphy. I will mark you as present, and you are here for our first roll call vote to approve the meeting agenda. Mr. Toots,
I approve.
Mr. Hardy,
Yes, I approve.
Ms. Carter,
I approve.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I will note for the record that the outcome of the vote ensured that more than 2/3 of those present voted affirmatively to adopt the agenda and consider the items on it.
All right, I'm back up with you. We can now
Fantastic.
move to
The first item on the agenda,
yeah, look, I'm looking at the following the roll call vote.
I said that already.
Got all that? So we're on item E, committee
Yes, sir.
discussion and action items. And we'd like to, number one, review the current board membership.
Sure. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And we'll take just a minute here before we get to the recommendation and recall the purpose of this committee and the work that we knew that we needed to do. You'll recall that it's been about two and a half years ago now that we began a discussion around the need to have a more structured way that we go about in improving engagement of individual board members, but at the same time, reviewing the skill sets and the backgrounds of those individuals who sit on the board. And that is a large chunk of the responsibility of the governance committee. So for item 1 today, we have for you a report that is a review of current board membership. We included as a part of that a demographic view, as well as a review of experiences, as well as a review of the continuity of membership on the board. I think all of you have witnessed over the last few years the turnover that has occurred in other higher education boards throughout Louisiana and the impact that it's had on their ability to do business. We felt like this was a preemptive step that we should take to make sure that when the time came for the governor to recommend appointees to the board, be it reappointments or new appointees, that we weigh in and make sure the governor understands what this board believes is the appropriate skill set and background that we have a need in. So what you have before you is a report that covers each of those items. I'll go ahead and read the recommendation, and then we can have a discussion around that report. Staff recommends that the governance committee of the board accept the attached report to better understand the demographics, continuity, and experience of the LCTCS Board of Supervisors members. So with that, I would ask Sarah, if you will, to please display the item E1.
Hold on one second, Dr. Sullivan. I am pulling it back up. It
No
deleted.
problem. And actually, it's less about the item and more about the first backup spreadsheet. That would be experience and skill sets. While Sarah's bringing that document up, I want to maybe as we go through this, I want to maybe ask 2 questions of you. First and foremost, this is the first time we've been through this. It's the first review of skill sets and the like. So as we walk through, I not only want to have a discussion with you about content, but I'd also like to have a discussion about presentation. Is there a way for us to better present this information to you, just so we're all on the same page about, sort of who falls into which category? The spreadsheet you see in front of you now deals with experience and skills. And this is the direct result of each member of the board completing a survey outlining their experience and background. So I'm going to take the first person listed there. Supervisor Torrey Bradford indicated that her primary experience is in government or legislative affairs. As you go down to the second one, there you see Ms. Carter, and you see a number of items that are checked. With also an addition out to the far right as the vocational technical education leader and entrepreneurship. So you kind of get a sense of the skill set and the background that each individual brings to bear. Now, I want to pause for just 1 second and ask if you have any questions about any of the items that you see thus far. Any questions or thoughts on the formatting of this document before we get into the content? All right, I would like to, if we can,
Hey, Roman's name
I'm
is
sorry.
spelled wrong. Sarah,
yes,
Roman's.
it sure
Oh, it
is.
sure is. Goodness. Okay, I apologize. That was my human error, and I will correct it for the official record.
Got it.
Hey, can I add operations to mine?
Yeah.
Thanks.
And could I add audit to mine? I'm on the ACCT audit committee.
Sure.
Absolutely. I'm making a note of that.
So as you look through this thing, I want to just grab information technology as one example. And look, information technology isn't necessarily the top high ticket item for work of our board, but it certainly is an important thing for us to have people on the board who have that skill set. As you can see listed there, Stevie Toops is the only one listed with an information technology background. And so those are the kinds of areas where, as we look across sectors, as we look across the background and the like, we might want to begin to think about people who have those backgrounds where we have the least coverage, if you will. In some areas, government or legislative affairs, as an example, we have great coverage. But this really kind of helps us to identify the areas where we might have some weaknesses. There could be other categories across the top here that we need to add. That maybe those aren't all of the options that we should be looking at. So I really am interested, for the sake of this group, in trying to get a sense as to whether this document really sort of captures the experience that we're looking for, whether we need something more broad or more detailed. So any thoughts on that question?
So Monty, how are these definitions or these categories of skills developed when y'all did that internally?
Yeah, so the categories that were the survey that you completed included, for instance, accounting, and it explained the aspects of accounting in parentheses behind it.
Right.
Or in audit, it explained the categories of audit that you may have been involved in. So there really is no hard and fast definition. I guess really the number of categories that you see across the top could be 15 or 20 separate items. We could add to those, but
Right.
these are the ones that are more common among, in fact, this was adopted directly from a couple of different sources. We have other state systems that do similar kinds of work, but then also there are other boards, one board in particular that I serve on, where we do this kind of work every year as we get ready to nominate new members. Our circumstance is different. We're not going to go to the governor and say, you need to appoint this person. Instead, we'd go to the governor and say, hey, we need coverage in workforce development, as an example, or whatever the slack category may be. Does that make sense?
It does, and I don't mistake my question as any kind of criticism. I like it. I just, it certainly is meant to. I'm gonna put words in your mouth. It's meant to be reflective of the skill sets we need to have a successful board.
Yes,
I mean, that's the way I'm interpreting this. Let me put it that way. So, I think it's first off, I think it's a great exercise. I'm just, I hadn't thought about it in these terms until I reviewed this document. So I think it's a pretty good exercise. Probably could be modified as we look at it, in years to come. But that's a pretty good exercise.
Yep.
I agree with Stevie. I think it's a fantastic inventory to do. I think it's great.
Yep. Very good. Anything that you see off the surface that you would change about sort of how we have this information laid out?
Dr. Sullivan, I wanted to note for the record, it looks as though some of the X's were mixed up, because just in quick looking at this, Craig Spawn should definitely have the information technology, and for some reason it dropped down to Stevie Toops' name. So I'm trying to correct this document really quickly to make sure that we have the accurate data, and I apologize. And that just means I need to learn Excel a little bit better.
No,
but I think that some
Sarah,
of
maybe, when we did
sorry.
this, maybe some people just didn't check the boxes. Cause I mean, I did check IT because at the time I was our CIO. So
okay.
I don't think it dropped. I think maybe Craig didn't check it. I do remember us doing the survey. People may not have realized what we were using it for. So, but I do think you could add it to Craig also.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm just trying to verify the data, and so I'm doing that as you guys continue to talk. So give me a few minutes, and if I find anything striking other than those two things that I caught real quickly, I will let you guys know. I'm comparing the two documents right now.
So with that, what I would suggest is that the governance committee try to convene at least once per year in the April-May timeframe. As you are aware, every other year in June, we have somewhere between 3 and 5 seats on our board that roll up. And I guess what I would want to make sure of is that we had done this exercise in advance of any of those reappointments or appointments to the board that typically happen in the June timeframe. So, it's not that this one needs to be perfect. It's just that we want to establish a process by which we review on an annual basis. So everyone comfortable with what you see thus far in the first sheet of the report?
Yep, I am. And Monty, this is Stevie, if I could chime in, Stevie Smith, that is, although there are some of these areas that look like we don't have a lot of experience on the board, I don't look at it as sometimes we need to appoint a new person to the board. I think it's somebody on the board ought to be involved in this particular issue within our system. Okay. Let's face it, we have experts in most of these, if not all these areas within the system. We just need a board member that's in tune with it and frankly informed about it.
I think you're absolutely right. It should help us in selection of things like chairs, right, of individual committees or working on specific subjects. If we're talking about a new ERP implementation or an upgrade that the board needs to be aware of, we certainly want to make sure that people with that background are engaged. So great point. Sarah, if we can, let's turn to the next page of this report. Again, you'll see the board members to your left. You also have a category that indicates their board office position. The next section indicates ethnicity, then gender, years of service on the board, and then some of the details about your appointments. So again, I think it's an important thing for us to realize the male-female breakdown in terms of gender as well as ethnicity, so that we recognize some of the things that we hear going on out there within the state, where people are making comments about how our boards look. We are the most diverse board of higher education in the state, and that is something that I think all of us consider to be a point of pride and something that we want to maintain and continue to work with the governor to keep. There is a third element of these categories that I want to bring to your mind, and that is continuity. The changes that have occurred in the board over the last 6 or 7 years have brought pretty significant change to this board. When you lose folks like going back to, say, a Woody Ogier or a Vinnie St. Blanc, when you lose people who have been on this board for that amount of time, there's a loss of institutional history. But then the question becomes, who steps up? So if you look at that years of service, you have Helen Carter at 14 years. You have Mr. Murphy at 15 years. You have Stevie Smith at 18 years. Stevie Toops at 13 years. I mean, when you think about those numbers, you just don't see those across the higher education landscape at the same level. Tim Hardy at 11 years. I mean, this is the number of double-digit years of service on a board is really unheard of in Louisiana. So that's something for us to be excited about. But we also want to acknowledge that we need additional new members of the board coming in. So you have the Roman Hardys at 1 year. You have Stan Salat at 3 years, right? You've got a couple of folks that are the up and comers that are going to be the future of the board. And I think that is the important part for the governance committee to really grab hold of, to make sure that if by chance we have 3 or 4 folks that are longer serving members who either because of a lack of appointment or personal reasons or whatever are no longer on the board, we want to be sure that there's continuity. And so I really think it's important that this board and this committee in particular be aware of those elements. So any thoughts or comments on this report? All right, Hearing none. Sarah, I believe that is the second and final page of item number 1. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That's what I thought. Okay. Anything further on item 1? All right. Hearing none, the board.
I wanted to let you know that without the exceptions that Stevie and Tim asked me to add, this is the correct data, and I went ahead and added information technology to Craig, but it was not messed up as I was worried about.
So with the consent of this board, what I would ask is that we go back as a staff and put together these elements in policy so that we put a little more framework around so that future board members will know a little bit more about the role, scope, and mission of the governance committee to make sure that we hit each one of these items. So I'm glad to work with Sarah to try to bring forward a policy recommendation from this body that captures all of these elements. So given that item E1 is a report, the board has received that report. Glad to move on to item E2 if you're ready.
And Monty, technically the paragraph you just said was basically the recommendation too. So
right. Got it.
Onward to number 2.
Onward to number 2. So the item number 2 is very similar to what we've seen in number 1, but it really deals with engagement and attendance. And perhaps I should flip those two and say attendance and engagement. And this is one of the areas where we felt like it was necessary for the governance committee to engage. We were experiencing a circumstance where particularly some of the newer members were not as present in terms of ongoing meetings as maybe we would like for board members to be. We do have a policy within the board bylaws that requires members to attend at a minimum 2/3 of the meeting in a given year. So with that, we've come together and taken the attendance for the last 3 years, and we'd like to lay that data out. Now, what is important to note here is engagement is broader than attendance. And I'm going to pick on Supervisor Hardy for a moment. You are aware that Supervisor Hardy, for instance, in just the last 2 board meetings, as an example, once was in attendance at an ACCT Congress meeting in Washington, or virtual from Washington, and then secondly was involved in the search for the new leader of ACCT. And so a classic example of someone who is highly engaged, but not necessarily able to meet the meetings in terms of attendance. And so as you go across the stack here, we'll take a look at Torrey Bradford just as an example, using her because she's right at the top there.
Look, I didn't.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought I was on mute.
So the first board member listed there in Torrey Bradford, you see attended 3 of 6 meetings in the 18-19 year for 50%. Then the second stack in 1920, she attended, let's see, 2, 4, 5, 6, 5 out of 6 meetings for 83%. And then in 2021 has attended 4 of the 5 meetings thus far and pending the June meeting. So that percent would be up there around 83, 84% as well. And I think that block is just an omission. Is that correct, Sarah? Got it.
Yes, sir. It should be 80% in that block, and I apologize for being missing.
Yep. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about sort of the purpose of this. First of all, we do have a bylaw that says members should be in attendance 2/3 of the meetings. That's number one. But secondly, there are other options for us as a board when we see attendance as a problem for a given member. The beginning of each year, we have started a process where board members acknowledge that I need to attend 2/3 of the meetings. And then the second step in that process is when you do the board self-evaluation, you're asked the question, did you meet the threshold of 2/3 of the meetings? And then the final point is, if we find ourselves in a place where individuals are not participating as a part of the board, how do we handle that? And I think, as several of you are aware, it is a very difficult spot for me as the president or members of the staff to interface with folks who seemingly are not engaged. It puts us in a kind of a confrontational position. But the responsibility of the governance committee being to drive attendance and drive participation, there may need to be strategies that we put in place to help address some of those challenges. And in particular, I won't call any names, but when there's been a 3-year cycle of each of those 3 years being below 2/3 of the meetings met, we have a problem. And we probably shouldn't allow ourselves to get 3 years into that before we do something about that challenge. Let me give you a couple of examples in doing a little bit of research around how to manage this. I was a part of a JEDCO meeting recently, Jefferson Economic Development Corporation meeting, where upon taking roll, the chair asked for a motion to accept the absences, which I think is kind of interesting. I've never seen that before. So you've got 21 members of the JEDCO board. You've got 15 of them in attendance. You have 6 who are not in attendance. And the motion is requested by the chair. Do I have a motion to accept the list of absences? And that would be the point in time where you could say, Mr. Hardy's not able to join us today because he is representing our system with ACCT in the ACCT Congress. So it calls out the point of attendance. We might not want to be that forward. That's just one example of how one organization handles it. On the flip side, it could be that it is the responsibility of the chair of governance to have a conversation with members that are less engaged than others. I also think it's important as we look at this 18-19 through 2021 data to recognize that we faced a pandemic in the middle of this. So perhaps Zoom made it easier, perhaps it made it more difficult for some. But I do think it's important that we as a board look at this data on a regular recurring basis to make sure that folks understand we're paying attention to this. So let me stop there and just ask if there are any questions or comments. All right, is this the format you want to see this data in? Is this helpful?
Looks good.
It's good with me.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good with it.
So, this also is an opportunity for us to be able to say to the governor, as an example, we're having some engagement challenges. Let us tell you what those are, and not to tell the governor who to appoint or any of those things, or who not to appoint or who to remove from the board, but instead to just make sure that we give him an update. Ms. Helen, I know you have taken the opportunity a number of times to mention, attendance challenges to the governor when you have that opportunity. And I encourage each one of you to do that. When you have that time, if we're facing a challenge of that kind, I would hope that you would speak up and say to the governor, this is a challenge for us. But just want to make sure that you have the data in front of you so that we can say, not only do we have it as a bylaw, but we also are reviewing it on a regular and annual basis.
So Monty, this is Stevie Smith. So,
Yes, sir.
other boards that I have sat on, and I'm sure just about everybody on this call has sat on some other boards that have had the same things. People sign up for boards and then they can't fulfill whatever commitment. Almost every other board I've been associated with, the chairperson, whoever the current chairperson is, I mean, it's their job to go reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on? Where you been? You moved out of town, you got family issues. I mean, that's kind of how it plays out in all these other boards where these other boards don't have a supervisory appointing authority like we have with the governor here. Okay. I mean, we still follow that pattern.
We do. And I guess, one of the questions that we've got to work through is does it now, given the fact that we've added a governance committee, does this become the responsibility of the chair of governance committee, or does it remain with the chair of the board? I'm perfectly comfortable either way. I just wanted to be sure that there was a venue within which we could have these kinds of discussions. So everybody's on the same page about the data in terms of attendance or engagement. We have not, as you can see here, this is only attendance. This does not reflect engagement. We might point to, a number of you have participated as a part of Board of Regents meetings, as an example, or participated as chair of the Facilities Corporation, or participated on the foundation board. So there are a whole range of different ways that you are engaged. And so we need to figure out that part of the rubric, but I thought it was important that we at least start with attendance. So if this board wants to continue to have the board chair in the responsibility of calling up folks and saying, hey, we missed you, that's great. If we want to do it with the chair of the governance committee, I'm fine with that as well. The main thing is, I just don't think we want to be in a position where we ignore it, because ignoring it is not going to solve the problem long term.
Yeah, I agree with that, Monty. Really do.
All right. Any other questions or comments on the attendance report? All right.
What if you, Monty?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Alan. What if you had some kind of form letter without the person having to directly contact them the first time and just tell them we'd been missing them and it was their problem or what have you? Real nice letter to them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that person wouldn't feel so obligated. You know, it's bad to put that on somebody.
Yeah. Well,
at first.
Absolutely. And I think there are a couple of folks on this call who have been in that chair role, a number of you, in fact, who have walked that path before and had to pick up the phone and make that phone call. And it's uncomfortable, right? I mean, it's uncomfortable for everybody, not the least of which is the person who maybe is not able to attend because they have overloaded themselves or are dealing with personal circumstances that they haven't been able to attend. So I have no problem with having a letter go out to board members who do not attend, maybe for the first meeting, the second meeting.
First time.
Right. Once we get to a certain point there where we're a year has nearly eclipsed and we're well short of the 2/3 mark, I think that's the point at which it might be appropriate for either the chair of the board or the chair of the governance committee to step in and have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I mean, Monty, this is Stevie, for what it's worth. That's the way we ought to do it. I mean, you got somebody that for whatever reason doesn't want to participate for whatever reason. I mean, we'll have the chairman reach out to them and see where they are, and that's a good way to, emphasize we need them. But look, hey, make your own decisions. If you got other things that are happening, we understand life happens. Okay.
Well, that gives them an opportunity to get right.
That's right. That's it. All right. So what you see in terms of formatting is good. If you guys are comfortable with it, then we'll continue to produce this on a regular basis. It might be appropriate for the governance committee to get an update maybe mid-year of each year, and then to have an annual meeting in about the April-May timeframe, just so we kind of get a sense of where things stand for the year. Fair enough?
Oh, geez.
Sarah, if you will help us to put that into the policy document that you and I will work on
Yes, sir.
after we complete today, then we'll make sure to cover that one as well.
Yes, sir.
All right. Those are the two items that I have for you. If there are no further questions, I'll read the recommendation on the second one just to make sure we're covering our bases. Staff recommends that the governance committee of the Board of Supervisors receive the following report and develop strategies to encourage better participation by the board in regularly scheduled board meetings, as well as other college and system-wide events. All right. With that, Chair Toops, I'll turn back to you.
Dr. Sullivan, thank you very much. Is there any other additional business that the committee needs to look at?
Yes, sir. Mr. Toops, I want to note for the record, if no one else comes up with any additional business, that there was no request for public comment through our online or our telephone system for public comment.
Of course. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. And Dr. Sullivan.
Excuse me, do we need a vote on that? But
No, those are just reports to be received, so there's no need for a vote.
Good.
And Dr. Sullivan, to you and the team, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. I think both of these are excellent opportunities to dot every I and cross every T as we analyze and just continue to try and drive and get better and better and better at what we do. With that, we'll move on to other business. Is there any announcements to come before the committee or other business necessary?
I would like to make one comment. I did do my ethics training yesterday, or not training, I turned in my report, and mentioned I had a Zoom meeting today, and Mr. Mike suggested that I remind y'all, if you hadn't done it, to do it. So there you go.
That's your tier 2.1
Tier
ethics
2.1, yes.
statement, and I was going to remind them too. So thank you.
Okay, good. I did mine.
As we
It does
complete,
only take just a few minutes to do.
it takes more than a few.
It
but-
takes longer than that.
Although Sarah is in government, you never know what a few means to them. So, and Sarah, you know, we just mean that from our hearts, right?
I know you do. I know you do.
Seeing no more announcements, no more other business, I would request a motion to adjourn the meeting. I see a first by Mr. Price, a second by somebody over here on the right, maybe Stevie or Mr. Hardy. Do appreciate everyone jumping on this morning. I apologize for being a few minutes late. And Tim, I would, for the good of the country, I would tell you that that big open space behind you, I have a picture of me on a pool float that you could put right there if you need a thing.
I definitely need it. I'm gonna put you and Porter Wagner there together.
I knew it was coming. I knew there was no way you were gonna miss that one.
Can't think of a better way to end the meeting. Everybody have a great